spelled a guy's name wrong. He said, I'll do it later.
Did you catch the wrong spelling? Is that why there was a problem?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm glad you got that figured out, but now you're losing thousands of dollars.
No.
Go ahead and turn stuff off.
No, that's not true. That's not true. This is podcast 12012. We always start these things with like no introduction. Anybody who happens to watch by mistake, they get at this podcast and it's like, what are these idiots doing? We don't ever actually start, except in the middle of a sentence. Nobody has any idea what we're talking about. So we finished up our podcast 11, kind of left it hanging as to how do you deal with conflict and division and address some of those things without losing your friends, your family, your neighbors, anybody you've ever met, because the things that are at stake in this world are just so incredibly potent. So we kind of left off with...
We called this healing the rift, right?
To try and heal the rift. First of all, we have to address what the rift is.
I just wrote healing the rift. I didn't try, just heal it.
No, I know. Heal the rift. Yeah, just heal the rift. It's like going down to Africa and going to the Rift Valley and trying to heal the rift. I mean, it's like so massively large. How in the world can you heal something that's just so massive? I think we're seeing it all over the country, all around the world now, in terms of destroyed relationships. People won't talk to each other. Kind of one of the funny aspects of life is being unfriended on Facebook. Like, and then Facebook doesn't tell your unfriended friend that they were unfriended. Right. So you can kind of secretly, you can slink away with your tail between your legs and nobody will know. And even once you've unfriended them, you can't send them a note and said, I unfriended you, because you've been unfriended. So it's like, okay, what's the point of doing that? I mean, just skip right over their post. Nah, people don't want to do that. It's like what's at stake is so massive right now. I think that's... So I think the way we were going to talk about it today in terms of healing the rift is the topics you're not allowed to talk at the Thanksgiving table. Once everybody's an adult, is religion, politics, and money. At least at our table, those are the forbidden subjects. And if we were all Germans, they would be verboten. You can't. You're not allowed. You're not allowed to talk about that stuff. And the problem is when we sit down to talk, pretty much that's what we gravitate to. Something that's the core of our religion. And the differences between us, or something about politics and the divide that there is now. Man, we should have Thanksgiving in February, because we sure got a lot to talk about now.
Well, it all starts with the aspect of what Thanksgiving is about. Anyway,
that's right.
So the fight.
Gratitude, generosity, family, happiness. Yeah. Right. And what do? Argue and eventually leave the table. Yeah. But it happens. It happens. I mean, it's incredibly widespread. Yeah. So if we're going to heal the rift, what's at the base? What is it that is creating what is the rift itself?
Ooh, good question. What is the rift?
A friend of mine is on the political spectrum. I won't say which side, left or right. But the issue that was raised over the weekend was about gun control. And I'm not going to say which side of gun control the person was on. But it was intense. And the challenging statements that were made as I read my friend's posts really had to do with kind of throwing the gauntlet down as beyond just a request. It was down to a demand, almost a threat. I'm not going to say which side it was on, because both sides do this. whether you're anti-gun or you're pro-gun, or you think the Second Amendment should be removed from the Constitution, or everybody in the United States ought to buy weapons and be trained on how to use them. It doesn't really matter. The issue is the rift gets accentuated because of that particular topic. And so my comment to my friend was, this is not really about the issue of the gun. It's the rage that's occurring about the gun. Rage on both sides. And my friend, after a couple of hours, probably wasn't on Facebook reading in live time, but commented back, if I could somehow deal with the rage in my own family, I might be able to understand the rage in our country. And ultimately, that is a fabulous insight. That is, the lights are just going on. We can talk about the rage in the country and the split between libtards and Nazi Republicans, on and on. We got names for everything. But ultimately, all politics is local. I mean, it really comes down to what really matters to me right now at the Thanksgiving table. And being able to address the rage, because if it was benign, it doesn't really matter whether you're Republican or Democrat. Everybody's getting along. You just kind of have a different view. You're on the left side of the same road or the right side of the same road, but we're all going the same direction. If that's what was really happening, then there would not be an excitement of these very, very powerful emotions and motivations. But they do exist, and people who are in that kind of conflict or quarrel don't define the road as the same road at all. The definitions in mind are completely separated. So as we talk about emotion, and we're going to talk about motivation as well, but as we talk about emotion, one of the 5 emotional systems we call empowerment. And being empowered, when emotion becomes really significantly passionate and empowerment drives it up, it can be determination, it can be competitiveness, but anger can become rage or violence very, very easily. We've seen that happen in just the last week. This conflict over the election, who got elected, who got stolen, on and on and on and on. Maybe in history, in 5 years, we'll actually know what really happened. Maybe we won't, but we might. But eventually, we'll have taken a course. We are taking a course. And as of our discussion today, Joe Biden is the president-elect, and he's going to be installed in about a week. 9 days from now. But that whole topic, even putting the topic up, creates this level of energetic empowerment, this anger, this rage, this violence that is just astounding. It is a huge rift. And what's actually interesting is that in virtually every discussion, when we talk about Trump versus Biden, doesn't matter. I mean, that could be way past, and it's other politicians. What is at the core of that split? Religion, politics, and money. Those are the 3 things you're not allowed to talk about at the Thanksgiving table.
Exactly. And I mean, I want to back up to, where that talking about the rift, friend, I could just deal with the rage, and where does, and I would venture into a couple things. One is that I personally believe that we live out our belief system. So our behavior comes from our belief system, not what I know and not what I think I know to believe, but what I truly believe. Here are core values. And so where does that rage come? My belief. I heard a really great story actually yesterday. I thought, man, this so fits what we're talking about today. And maybe you've heard the story. It's called the Dead Man Walking story. Have you heard the story?
No.
And
I
the
mean, I
story
saw the
goes like
movie
this.
Dead Man Walking, but you're not talking
Yeah, but
about
not that. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the story is a man is convinced that he's
okay.
dead around, but he is his best friend. He keeps saying to him, "But I'm dead." I'm really bothering his best friend. So his best friend's trying to help him come back to reality, come back to understanding. He's not dead. He's walking around, but he's not dead. He's convinced he's dead. Totally convinced. So his friend says to him, his best friend says to him, "Look, do you believe in science and doctors and all that kind of stuff?" And he goes, "Well, yeah, I believe in that stuff." He says, "Okay." So he got 3 of the best medical books out there, went through them with the Dead Man Walking, showed him illustration after illustration after illustration that dead people don't bleed, right? And so awesome material. So he says to his friend, "So what he says, "Yeah, those are good. Those are really good." He says, "Okay, give me your hand." So he hands him his hand, takes a blade, cuts his hand, and he starts to bleed. The dead man, he starts to bleed. And standing, it get big, and he looks at that, and he said, so his best friend, "So, do you understand that you're not dead now because of what is in these books?" And the guy looks at his hand, and he looks at him, and he looks at the books. Well, actually, no, what this tells me is that all science and books are wrong.
That dead people do bleed.
Do bleed, right? Dead people do bleed because I'm dead. That is an awesome illustration of what we talk about in motivations of culture. When we get to the point where we become blinded, to the point where, yeah, I mean, dead men do bleed and all science is wrong. It's amazing because we've come to that point where we're living out our belief structure that is inerrant because it is skewed through something we have decided in our minds that I'm going to believe this regardless. And I don't care what you say to me. Dead men do bleed. All science, dead men bleed. I've just proved that dead men bleed. So you can prove either side. But the question really comes down to, the issue comes down to, what is my intrinsic belief system that I have adopted for whatever reason. And now I've moved to this point where I no longer will accept any outside information that is truth, any outside information that goes against what I believe, because my beliefs are my beliefs. And I put myself in that driver's seat that says everybody else is wrong, I'm right. And I no longer am listening or want even to have the capacity at that point, probably, I would say that's probably very real, to engage in some kind of other information that goes contrary to beliefs. And I think where you find yourself now, because we are wrestling with all of what's gone on last week when by the way, I have to change it wasn't 1812, the British, it was 1814, the British burned
It
the
was the
Capitol.
Battle of 1812. It was the War of 1812 that lasted
Right,
for
but it
2
was
years.
bad.
But the
But
breach
it
was in
happened
1814.
in 1814.
Yeah. I was
Yeah.
alive then, so I remember that.
Well, I know, because you believe that, and that's
But
what's
keep
really
going.
sad here.
Keep going.
So I think that what we're addressing today is very important, because now you have a whole group of, and I saw the paper this weekend, which was fascinating. people that I watched, and I actually still get a newspaper, which most people don't know what that is, except Mike because he's old. And so I actually read in the paper their belief structure about how bad all these people are in the left and the right. I mean, towards the left of my world, yada yada yada. Now that whole thing has come crashing down because of the events of what's happened and the reality that, oh my word, how did we get here? How did we get to be to a place where it was okay for us to physically storm the Capitol and scream profanities and and threaten people physical life, and I mean in very real time, not some hyperbole or some, I mean, you can say what you want. It may have been staged to start with, but when it got going, it got out of control, and it was a mob mentality. We all know that is a very real thing. Riot mentality is a very real thing. You and I know that, working with huge groups of people, that can taste, and people lose all sense. They lose all sense of responsibility and accountability, and they just go crazy at that point of causing mayhem. That has scared, I think, and has gone from where these people were in our world, and you and I, we talk about empowerment, right? Then all of a sudden it did what? What category did it flip them into? Like right now in our world. That was a question for you. Are you awake? Oh, the legislators went from empowerment to what in our world we would call it.
In the moment that the protesters broke through the doors and started coming after them, certainly it's going to be exposure. I mean, they're now terrified, overwhelmed. They're not really phobic. They're now at extreme levels of fear or a lack of safety, any kind of security to some degree. Now, they may have known something that we as observers didn't know. In the Capitol building, there are tunnels and passageways that no one knows about. And the ability for the principal legislators to move around that building and to get out instead of using the front doors, hundreds of legislators evacuated from that chamber in 15 seconds. 15 seconds. And they're all gone.
Right.
Mike Pence was actually in the chair leading the group. Two Secret Service guys walked up to him and said, "You need to come." He says, "I can't come now." They basically picked him up and he disappeared and no one knows where he went. So from their point of view, they may have said, "We are anxious, but we're not really frightened because we actually have weaponry that should we need to, we could unleash an amount of response that no one carrying." Now, one of the things that I find interesting, the Patriot people that were outside the Capitol, a few of them had AR-15s and other kind of weapons. Nobody crossing the threshold into the Capitol brandished any kind of a weapon at all. There were no pistols. There were no guns. There were no firebombs. There were flagpoles. And one scene shows a guy with an American flag trying to hit one of the police officers with a flagpole. With a flagpole? This is a well-choreographed coup. This is a insurrection, and they come with flagpoles. And the flagpole, the end of the flagpole wasn't even sharpened into a spear. So wait a minute. Wait a minute.
All right, now you're
so what I'm looking at it from the point of view of somebody who's in the chamber, and they're not coming. I was in Honduras when a coup took place. I was in Rwanda prior to the crash of the plane carrying the two presidents, and seeing what Tutsis and Hutus were doing to each other. When we were in Honduras, I was on my flight there. I was in Chicago, headed for Honduras, when the president was overtaken by an army, basically an army that went in and removed him from. When I went down for our graduation 3 years ago in 2017, because the president had managed to gain a second term, which was against their constitution, 1 term per president, 4 years, and they're out. And Juan Orlando Hernandez got a second term by changing the constitution. The whole country was in a complete uproar. Bridges blocked, guys with wrappings around their face, fires set in the streets. I mean, it was just unbelievable stuff. But that didn't happen in the Capitol. It was people with flagpoles and waving Confederate flag as they went running through the Capitol.
But you're talking, they don't face this kind of thing. And so we can debate that all day. The bottom line in this is that, again, coming back to why does that rage come at the bottom? Where does that come from in the rift? So that when I sit around the table talking about money, power, politics and religion, how do we help people? And this is my point here. How do we help them have dialogue to a way to enter into a relational concept, a relation of discussion that moves me from this culture that we call culture that has become so cemented. Is it possible when, like the dead man walking, that as you flip the science around and says, yeah, but this is how I'm going to interpret it, that says all science is wrong because obviously dead man, when we know, we look at that, well, that's crazy. The guy can't lead if he's dead, and yet he chooses to believe that over everything that's being presented to him. So
okay.
I think the real point of this is, how do we help people enter into some kind of way to that dialogue forward? I mean, that ability to move from such strident belief structures that are not real, to help people start being able to some dialogue that you can have relationships. So we're not on these two sides of this is causing huge damage in our relationships, in our families, in our workplace, in our churches. I mean, you name it, it's happening.
Right. So if we take those 3 topics, religion, politics, and money, the one common denominator to all 3 is power.
Okay.
Who gets to control or manipulate or drive an agenda in politics, in religion, and in money, in economics? That question is what drives the rage and conversely the fear, and in my view. So I was thinking, I read somewhere in the last week or so, I don't remember which thread it was on, but somebody made an accusation of the other side, and I don't remember whether it was a right side person accusing a left side person, or a left side person accusing a right side person, or an atheistic person accusing a Christian person, or a Christian person accusing it. That doesn't matter to me. But the accusation was, your problem is you're brainwashed. That was the phrase, you're brainwashed. Right. And it doesn't matter which side it was on. And the response was, I'm not the one who's brainwashed. You're the one who's brainwashed. It was an exchange like that. and I reflected on that as sometime in the last couple of weeks. What's interesting is all brainwashed people think everyone else is brainwashed.
Exactly.
One of the things that happened during the days of Nazism is now the world looks at the Nazi movement and say Adolf Hitler was a master mental manipulator. He was able to brainwash millions of young German men and accordingly their women to become this mighty army that believed whatever he told them to say. But in the Nazi party, they were saying the rest of the world has been brainwashed. It's not us who are brainwashed.
Right.
They're the ones who are brainwashed. So when a family member is going to do a recovery or an intervention for a child or a parent or a family member or friend who's gotten sucked into a cult, I don't care, name the cult. Doesn't matter what the cult is. The issue is, how do you break the brainwash that has happened within the cult? But in the cult, they say, we're not the brainwashed people. We're not the ones who believe they're dead. They're the ones who believe they're dead. We're the ones that have the truth. So now we have a stacking of values, and the values become so rigidly fixed because it matters. The outcome matters. Now, if it only matters for this afternoon, who gets to drive the car and who gets to drive the van? You know, whatever. Take the van for today, take the car for today. The whole issue hangs on a few hours or no big deal. Who wants to spend this money on a vacation cruise? That's a few $1,000s. It's no big deal. We're going to spend it. We're going to get it back. It's not a big deal. But who is saved? Who is saved? Who is going to hell? This is eternal stuff. Who is going to open our country's borders to millions and millions of illegal immigrants, and they're all murderers and thieves and rapists, and they're all coming in the United States? No, we're going to stop those. They're not murderers and rapists. They're just people that want a chance to get ahead in life. My grandmother came, on and on and on. So you're the one that's brainwashed. No, you're the one that's brainwashed. It comes down to an issue of power. Now, the rift, in my view, what I want to put in podcast 12 is that the issue at stake is the issue of power. How is power at work? Why do I want it? How do I believe I can get it? And what happens if you have more power than I have? That becomes the incredible stake on which these fights occur. So when somebody gets up from the Thanksgiving table or breaks off from Facebook or gets combative with another person, or a group against a group, or a community is divided, or the country or the world, what's ultimately at the issue? Is the word Democrat, 8 letters, better than Republican, 11 letters? Just a word, just a word. Back 150 years ago, the Republicans stood for what the Democrats stand for now, and the Democrats stand for what the Republicans stand for now. And all of a sudden, in 125 years, that has switched over from, that doesn't make any difference. It's a split of power. Why can't we have both sides arrive at the same side and say we believe in the same things? Because human beings don't work that way. So whichever party picks a topic and says, we're going to own this topic, that's a power issue. That's not a philosophical issue. That's a power issue. The other side is going to say, I'm taking the opposite view.
Right.
So now, if we can get down to whenever somebody becomes angry, when they're annoyed, when they're miffed, when they're furious, when they're anywhere in the empowerment slide, the system, what's at stake? is power. That's why we called it empowerment. So you know that the higher level of anger, the person becoming angry believes that there's more at stake, more and more and more and more at stake that matters. Now, you can't just say, hey, let's just wish that away. Just say it doesn't matter how many immigrants come to the United States. Doesn't matter how we're taxed. Doesn't matter whether we abort babies or not. Doesn't matter whether Joe Biden is elected or Donald Trump gets a second term. That really does, in the scope of eternity, I mean, who really cares? Well, to be able to say, just lower your demand. No, I'm not willing to do that. I can't reduce my investment in the outcome because it is so absolutely important. So that's what in my view, that's what creates the rift. My friend who said, if I could figure out how to solve the rage in my own family, I might be able to have an understanding of the rage in the country. And that's really what it's about. Why do people get up from the Thanksgiving table and walk away and won't have, why do relationships break up like that? It's over power. And if the issue was benign, that'd be one thing. If it really doesn't matter, it's when it really matters, when the stakes are really, really important. That is where we are. Well, so how do we heal that rift?
And again, it comes back. Well, I think we come back to what we talked about in the previous episode about healing the rift in 11, because we took a significant amount of time talking about and trying to understand the whole sense of sacredness and dignity in people. And when we move away from, I would say, the core value of the sacred and the dignity of individuals, and we replace it with something else, whether it's fear, whether it's whatever you want to call it, there has to be and I use that term this way, there has to be something greater than power. There has to be something to replace. To just say, stop doing that that's not going to change anything. People have to have an understanding of something that is greater, that is far more valuable and far more important than me getting my way, which in itself is the empowerment. So then if I am capable of viewing people in a different light, if I can see them in a sacred light, if I see them in a dignity world is other oriented, and I know people are listening to this and they're going, okay, I think I'm going to throw up because this sounds like socialistic garbage. Incredibly difficult to be. The courage that it takes to be able to face that. We talked about division in the truest sense. To be blunt, I think division is very easy to do, because it's easy for me to find a whole bunch of people that I agree with, and we can all be angry, and we can demand our rights or whatever we're going to do. But to be diverse means that I have to be willing to walk shoes. I have to be willing to understand what is going on in these people's lives. I have to put myself in a place that says, I get it. And wow, boy, did I misunderstand that from the standpoint I'm out here on the sidelines, never have been involved in that. But these people are real people. They're sacred. They have dignity. Do I think that's a higher value? And can I make that a higher value than me getting my way? That is not about being walked on. That's about viewing people very differently. That's true value. They have true value just as people. I mean, it's fascinating because you and I have, we have a bunch of kids between us, and right now, I have one that's, And I mean, you know that. But what's fascinating in her life, trying to deal with, she's fairly new, a couple of years. But what is so fascinating is that even within our family, people saying things and writing it's and she looks at this and goes, I can't believe what you people are writing. Well, it's because they have never experienced walking in her shoes. They have never been in that role. Now, I'm not advocating anything here. What I'm advocating is a sense of sacredness and dignity that says, I'm going to view about someone, then at least I deserve, they deserve, or the other side deserves me investigating and walking in their shoes enough to try and realize whether or not my view and my belief structure is even close to being accurate. And that's a whole different world. We don't do that anymore as a culture. We've stopped doing that. I don't even know when we stopped doing it. It's amazing to me to see that we don't have that capacity apparently anymore. And I don't know if that's a piece of it's gotten too easy to get on social media and on electronics and just be somebody and pretend to be somebody that really you're not, but because, if you will, base need to, be able to somehow think that that's going to make you, a stronger person, that's going to help your self-esteem, whatever you want to call it. I'm going, oh, that makes it worse when we're deriding people and we're demeaning people and we're belittling people and we're disregarding anything of the sacred. Um, and so if you keep going down that road as a culture, eventually you end up with anarchy because there's no relevant anymore. It's just survival of the fittest. And I don't think we want to be there. But that comes out of that deep sense of power base that has lacked the ability that to see the other side as anything other than the enemy. And I would say I would probably rest a lot of this at the feet of leadership in our country and our culture because they're the ones that set the environment. I also think that the church has a lot to do with that. I'm not against it. We have developed an us and them kind of mindset that is no longer they're sacred and there's no longer, and I can't believe some of the stuff. And yet, as well as I do, because we both are fairly uh, astute, that I don't sit here in gasps. I mean, because when you look back over history, what went on? What were the Crusades? What was, all of that stuff that the church, you know, the church, and it was very much the same kind of thing. They lost that whole sense of the and the dignity of the person, and they were doing power, just like you talked about.
Right.
So until we get there, and we are willing to face that with ourselves, and we talk about this all the time. In the world and our training and what we do, heads with a little diamond about what's reality. We say all the time those two diagnostic questions: what is this doing to me, and what am I going to do about it? But those have no function unless I'm willing to be accountable for me and for my thought process and my actions, and willing. Maybe there's a different dynamic that I could get involved in here that changes the outcomes because what I'm doing right now the outcomes are, and I don't like it. I don't like who I am. I don't like it. I don't like the society in what's happening. So then the question that comes back is, okay, are you going to own your piece of this? Am I going to own this piece of this? Am I someone that is going to be willing to face that I'm about power? I'm about getting my way, whether it's my opinion, whether it's physical, what is it? Do I see people as sacred? Do I give people dignity? I mean, how many times have we been in a grocery store line or some other line, and you have listened to people treat other people? I mean, I don't even treat my dog like that with the kinds of things they say. I mean, I have a young man that I interact with, and he works. You want to hear this one? He works for McDonald's. Okay, he's quite a ways up. He's been working there, and but you ought to hear the kinds of things people say to him, and he's trying to serve them. It's fast, and so I would never even begin to think about saying stuff like that to somebody that is so. Well, why is that? Very thing that you're saying, because it's power. I want it now. You're my laborer. I'm paying you to do this. Get it to me now. The same, buddy. I on that earpiece I'm talking to. That's he's not infallible. He makes mistakes. Other people make mistakes. Things happen, and I get it. So sometimes pressure in your life. There's still people that are sacred and deserve to be treated with dignity. So until we're willing to face that ourselves, I think we're going to have a really difficult time.
So let's get some actual practical solutions, okay? Because we can talk about this forever. One of the strings of comments that you made a couple of minutes ago is you gotta need to increase the tier or sacredness. Okay. The challenge is if a person is watching this and says, but I don't have sacredness, other people are my opponents, I'm not going to do that. Rift. Well, there are people who care to heal the rift. So if you don't care to heal the rift, we offer you. My friend, I figured out how to solve the raid in my own family. I could do something going on this phone. So I have two things you can add to these. One is in the say real time. Ask this question to the other person. Can you tell me your story of how you came to this way of thinking or this point? Tell me your story. And if a person, when we were traveling once on vacation, and we ended up with a flat tire that ruined the rim of our vehicle, the wheel of our vehicle, and it was hot, and we were out of time, and we didn't have the money to try and deal with $100-something for repair, and it was going to take hours to get thing fixed. Everybody was just really annoyed. I mean, just really at wit's end. And finally, after seemed like an hour and a half, a tow truck guy came, young kid, and he seemed to not have any idea what he was doing. So the angst of my family began to increase higher and higher and higher against this poor kid, 18, 19 years old, who got assigned to bring the tow truck out, help my family. And the tensions were incredibly high. So he was waiting for another person from the garage to come out and show him how to connect up. I don't remember what the technical thing was. He didn't know how to do it. It was before cell phones.
Right, sure.
So he was just kind of at a loss. He was responding to our anger with his own anger. Is really getting ugly. And in part of how I learned some of these things was in moments like that, when you have no clue as to what to do next. What do you do next? I just blurted out to him, so tell me, how did you come to have this job? Because in my mind, I'm thinking, you don't know anything of what you're doing. How did you even get this job? But instead of making an accusation, it was an inquiry. And I said, so how did you come to get this job? And he began to tell his story that his mother had died in a car accident. And the people who went to help dismantle the cars from the accident didn't know what to do. And he said, I'm not going to college. I got to find something else to do. I want to learn how to help people. I don't know how to do it yet, but that's why I'm here. And all of a sudden, the real story of a real guy who lost a real mom, and now he's trying to do something, changed the whole understanding of the moment. And it became not this inept, ridiculously unskilled jerk from the Appalachian Mountains that we can look down on and call names and tell stories about, insulting him forever and ever and ever. Became an actual kid on a journey trying to figure it out himself. Now, all of a sudden, we understood the story. And if in time, and I've tried this, it works, you get to the point of saying, tell me your story that brought you here. Let me listen to the story. I said 2 questions. The other question is to ask permission to be heard. Right. Instead of just blurting out your power statement, stop long enough to say to the person you're seeing as an opponent right now, can I tell you what I'm thinking? If the person says, no, I don't want to hear it, you say, okay, I did need to know that. I understand that. But if they say, okay, tell me your story. If you've asked permission, it changes the dynamic of what's going on. Those 2 things, ask the other person you're in opposition with, tell me your story. And the second thing is ask permission to tell your story. Those 2 things help heal the rift. In my experience and my study, the power issue is diminished. It's not eliminated, but it's diminished if people tell their story or ask for permission to tell their story.
And in that is the dynamic, because you and I on this, that's critical. If you want to try and begin to get that rift to be healed, is you have to be, in my mind, you have to be the person that's moved to give the, that comes, tell me your story. And as you do that, in my mind, very quick, that and telling the story, listening to that story in its truest form, in its fullest form, not your rebuttals, listening, so that you really do understand the story and where this, you and I both use different kinds of terminology as we engage people tell their story, and we have a whole series of how to ask questions and then ask better questions. But very simply, of using a couple of phrases, Mike uses the word interesting, a place that's a non-threatening, saying, well, that's really interesting. I also use the phrase, okay, that's really interesting. Help me understand how this came together a little more, so that what you're doing is you're filling in within the outline. And the goal of trying to do is to get as much of the outline as they give you the outline of the story, and the questioning and those kinds of things are you're trying to get them to color in the outline more so that you really get a very real picture of what this story is all about. And so that metaphor a ton from the standpoint of being able to do that as people explain their, but that alone begins to open the door that starts developing really what you're saying is this is becoming other, or it's becoming sacred, it's becoming having dignity to it, so that you then can also share your story. But again, I'm going to come back and say this again, this is not about being able to get ammunition to give rebuttal. It's about you understanding their story, which you have to turn that off in your head. And if you haven't done that, and you're always, you're always going to refute this, I'm going to rebuttal this, I'm going to, then you're not going to hear this, and you're not
right.
But
that becomes a self-reflective question. Can I turn off my agenda in my own mind?
Exactly.
That's a self-reflective question, and the answer to that is either yes or no, or that is really difficult for me to do. But to be able to say, I'm going to suspend my agenda at least for a moment so I can hear your story, is what says you as a person are more valuable to me than the accomplishment of the agenda. But that is a serious question. Anyway, so that we've given some ideas. We're going to pursue some of them. We're going to be discussing matters of power and power flow.
Yeah,
that's going to be a topic that we're going to cover. But this is a tough time right now.
Yeah. So this is Gripping Reality. We're really thankful you came and spent some time with us. And we know this kind of heavy duty today, and we didn't do a lot of laughter, which normally we do. But the bottom line is it is a tough question. So if you want to get a hold of us and want to leave some comments or questions or whatever, you can get us at.
Easiest way is to write Myke at GrippingReality, and you can spell Myke with a Y, M-Y-K-E, or Myke with an I, M-I-K-E. Goes to one of the two of us, Myke at GrippingReality.com. And we'll get the message. Fire back, push back, think hard, come up with your own thoughts, explain it. That's good to do.
All right. Great. Have a good one.
Yep.